Most of you have either known me, seen me, or been to one of these sermons at this point, but you're going to get the same spiel because not everybody is here and that might be watching this in the future also needs a reference for me. My name is Andrews, and I am the Hierophant of the Church of Witchcraft. And basically, as the Hierophant of the church, I try to keep things on the rails so they don't get too far off track, and that is mostly the job that I do. There's a lot of admin stuff that goes into that and some other facets as well. I practice celestial witchcraft. Celestial witchcraft has to do with astrology and planetary movements and how their interactions interact with this planet, this realm, how it influences our lives. Thank you for everybody for being here. It's good to see repeat faces. It's good to see new faces, and I'm just glad to have the opportunity to speak about this particular topic. And it is a bold one, I will say that. A child's innate curiosity leads them to finding thrills in the face of the unknown. Wonder, excitement, fear, who knows what's possible in that great unknown. In my younger years, my mother sought ways of connecting with me and with my life and experience. I was notoriously a bit challenging as a child to connect with, being an only child. This is about also our lives together, her life and my life, and also her journey as a single mother and also as another human in the world experiencing it too. Occasionally, late at night, she and I would turn off all the lights in the house, one by one. We'd light candles, and when we'd sit with a small, ornate box between us, my wonder and curiosity always peaked at this point. When she opened the box, a strong smell of incense was released along with the tarot cards. We would take turns reading the arcane symbols and comparing these symbols with our lives. Stories of our life experiences, that connection was readily accessible. She taught me how to use the tarot at an early age, and I would read her tarot as well. As a child, I learned how to do this and learned that this tool could be such a powerful, potent resource. We shared this back and forth over the years and learned from one another, and I carried that forward into my own life. We would do this all the way until the fire grew low, and then that ornate box was closed until another late night. As witches, we participate in rituals and ceremonies. Sometimes we cast spells and divine answers. How do we account for these phenomena? What makes this all tick? Perhaps it's a scientific force of some kind. Colloquially, we phrase this force as some type of energy. In some way, we all leverage or control or at least guide this force or energy for some outcome we desire or that we want to manifest. Ultimately, a conventional name for such a force or this energy is magic. Sir James G. Fraser blended these commonalities between science and magic. Both assume order and uniformity in nature. Both have causes that produce the same effects. Both have immutable laws that are foreseen and calculated precisely, things that you'll know and be able to plan for. Therefore, by his reasoning, by Fraser's reasoning, magic is a science. Here is a very important link in Western thought between magic and science. Misunderstood science, to him, appears akin to magic by Fraser's opinion. And this is something that we hear echoed in our own contemporary age. Yet magic is not something that is caged so easily. There are clear variations in the approach of magic from other magic users, from witches, from whomever is using magic that defy causality or regularity. And again, this kind of echoes that same concept. How do we account for this phenomenon? Since there is this defial of causality and regularity, magic cannot so easily simply be poorly understood science. The two have a distinct difference and clearly are not the same on this principle alone. They have different qualities. Just by the fact that one has causality and regularity, science on one hand, and magic may ignore that causality. Aristotle surmised something either has a quality or doesn't have a quality. And this is it became kind of insidious and permeated so much of our lives. And there's a place and time for that as well. Logic and rationale must reason what magic is. It needs to find some understanding, some finite answer that tells us what a thing actually is. But what if we instead consider it from this non-Western perspective? A realm not so fussy about thisness, what makes magic magic and what comprises it and how it's found. And instead of defining everything by what it must be, magic doesn't necessarily need to be something. There's some understanding of it though. And I think that the important part of this is that in my explanation of this and research on this, I thought it was a very interesting challenge to try and describe magic. Instead of considering magic as some sort of fundamental force or kind of energy, maybe we could consider it as a worldview, a perspective instead. Max Weber stated that magic is a social entity which gives supernatural sanction to the traditional conduct of life. So there's an appeal to the supernatural, some connection that we have that gives us the sanction to act in a certain way. The morals and values that I've talked about before, in the ethics sermon and across most of these sermons, ethics, morality, and how we engage with others is an important aspect and fundamental to what we do in witchcraft, to be, I suppose, respectful, understanding of others. And so Weber said that magic is a social entity. It's a mechanism that functions and dictates, or at least informs, some of these social connections between one another. And that is what's represented as the traditional conduct of life. And I think that, don't get too tripped up on the traditional part. It really is whatever is necessary for that community, or whatever is regular to that community, the conformity that they all have, how they dress, how they act, how they talk, what they eat, all of those basic things within life. There's a certain rhythm that every community has. And that's what it's referencing. This is a social mechanic, and it shapes those interactions and experiences. To this day, people use astrology and experts to relate to their world. How often do you experience synchrony at 11:11 or another specific time of the day? Or maybe you find reinforcement of luck in a bird that flies past, or some sign or symbol for you, or maybe even one of those lucky rabbit's feet. I haven't actually seen one of those in a very long time. Or when you go and pick up a penny. These are the interactions in our life. These are some of those things that are shaping our experiences, what we expect, what we want to happen. There are examples showing a magical worldview that influences our behavior and our experiences. One of the things that I found fascinating in this exploration was that magic inherently provisions no explanations. If you think about magic, does it give an answer, or is it a conduit rather to something that you're discovering or willing? And honestly, I don't know if magic needs to provide those explanations. Magic functions. I don't know if there's anything else beyond it needing to give some explanation for my life, why I'm here, or those things that may be a conduit to understand those. Our belief in this influence is sufficient for social and experiential interactions. I don't need to know why I'm having an interaction or why the language works the way it does in the context of just interacting or engaging with others. The language works the way it does, and that's okay. I don't need the underlying mechanics to do that. Some of that is something that we learn over time and that gets baked in, so we have this freedom of language and expression between one another. That's fair. But even so, I'm not thinking about putting in predicates or adverbs or certain parts of speech or sentences when I'm talking to others. There's a flow of that expression. I don't need the why or the explanation behind it. It doesn't need to give that to me. Explanations of ourselves and in life are found in science and or religion. These places can give us some explanation. Science uses all of the mathematical skill, the observation, all the things that come with science. And science has very hard lines about what is or what isn't and needs that reason. And those give us some of the explanation. Why is it that there's friction? Why do we have gravity? These are important matters and they do need to be considered. I'm not positing that magic should be the one and only way that we understand our world or our social interactions. It is just a way, one worldview, one perspective, and it doesn't necessarily exclude that of science, and it doesn't necessarily exclude that of religion either. Religion and magic have a tempestuous relationship. And this is some of that Western kind of thought that pops up for people, especially when they start considering these aspects of what something is. The problem is that in some circles of thought, people will reference that magic begot religion. So you had magic, the barbaric side of things, and into religion. These are the barbaric things in our life. Then, from magic is born science. So there's this linear progression and this sort of enlightenment framework of thought. We have a directionality that goes with that. That we had magic, this unruly thing, because we just didn't understand the world. And out of that, we tried to give it reason and order, and then provided it religion, somewhere that explains it, something that gives it that magic traction, some engagement, and defines its qualities. But magic and religion, to me, are really just more entangled. Magic doesn't beget religion. Just because there's magic doesn't mean that it leads to religion. The two are entwined. There's magical thinking in religion. In any number of religions, you'll see this kind of magical framework, especially to people who only posit that science is the ultimate reason. And that is kind of where that progression goes. When we get to the civilized component, magic comes out. From magic comes religion, from religion comes science. And then we see this development of ordered, organized, civilized thought. And I have some difficulties with this hierarchy. That hierarchical kind of thinking, that one must beget the other, that must get the other, doesn't really fit for me. And like I said, some people think that religion is just an outgrowth of magic. Others support the reverse. And I think that they are working in tandem, synonymously. And religion is one of those places that we get to learn magical thought or magical thinking as a frame of reference and perspective. The people that often are religious have seemingly some predisposition, some idea that they have a magical reference. They're predisposed to viewing things in a magical light. This brings up the ideas of faith and belief in things without the need for reason, that enlightenment kind of thought. The magical religious entanglement is a worldview, and that is one way to support cultural institutions. That magical thinking, that perspective is something that is shared in a religion. It's shared in a lot of different ways. You don't necessarily need religion to engage in magic. It just gives us some more of that explanatory aspect to it. which may or may not be necessary. Not everybody has these deep questions about where we come from and why we exist and what's my point. Usually we get around to it in most of our lives. We start thinking about those things. And magic can be an assistive tool for that. But again, there's other places to look that might give more sufficient explanation as to these, to give these answers, to give these explanations to why they are what they are, why we are the way we are. That Aristotelian either or view isn't necessary for the social cultural mechanism. I work in an environment that has primarily emotional communicators. It's what they do. They don't really work by reason. They work by subtext, and they have this dance that they do as they communicate with one another and move around their space together. And reason is not exactly part of that, or not the only part of that. It's not clear-cut order. There's a lot of influence from one another. Their life experiences come into the mix. The way that they experience things all matters, and it's a perspective. Similarly, magic is that kind of, could be potentially that kind of a view, that perspective that shapes some of these social, cultural interactions that we have. Many cultures are shaped outside, if you consider outside of, well, even in Western, but specifically a lot of external Western view thinking. You see this magical religious interaction. Let's look at the Norse pagans, for example. They're very integrated with what is going on in a magical view. It's how they reference the world, what they understand. It shapes their behavior. You know, they want to fight and they want to die honorably to be able to go to the next realm of the 9 realms that they talk about. In fact, there's not really a good translation of which in Norse paganism. They have different terms, and a lot of their magic is not hard-coded spells like an occultist magician might function, right? They don't have these kinds of formulas. They have behaviors. They have ways that these behaviors interact and influence their life. The type of magic that I remember specifically about Norse paganism is sung magic, magic that is in song. Actually, Lord of the Rings also references magic in song, and it's one of the fascinating aspects of magic to me, and an expression of what magic might be. But singing is not one that comes up in British traditional witchcraft. We don't see a lot of singing in that. You know, we see a lot of behavioral momentum. We see a lot of progression through very clear sequence ordered steps. You'll see that in Western esoteric thought. When you look at secret societies like the Golden Dawn, Rosicrucians, they have these very clear steps. The Freemasons have very clear steps, but that's not the only way to think of magic. Other cultures and other groups that practice voodoo, for example, they live with their loa. They are very much integrated at a very basic, fundamental level in their lives, in their households, and they're integrated into this spiritual interaction, this harmony, this rhythm between the loa and cells and other magical components to their faith, belief, and use of magic, which is very different than a Western perspective. I think that it's interesting that there was this division in ancient Greece, I suppose, would be the best place to point that to, but you see this budding of rationality that was a big trigger for Enlightenment thinking in the Renaissance. That particular thought is that they also had a very strong link to their deities. They had patron deities on most of their major cities, as an example, and it was very much integrated. That was a representation of things in their societies and what it meant for them, and it was a way that they referenced their world. Indigenous Americans similarly integrated nature and animism into their practices, and it was this very robust, and still remains to this day, a very robust tradition of interaction from a magical viewpoint that supports their society. And this is also that support society. Think about the roles within tribal cultures or tribal communities. There's usually a priest or a priestess or a clergy class of some kind that is guiding their interactions. They're a medium between the supernatural that provides those sanctions, and that goes through them, and they sanction the rest and provide morality and values and ethics and understanding how to relate to it. I mean, even most of the Abrahamic religions also have this kind of viewpoint that there's some entity out there known as God that can influence their lives when they supplicate them enough, when they do enough right or good. And even if you don't have religion, if you go into Santa Claus, for example, that is its own self a magical frame of reference that is shaping and influencing behavior. All of these things are not the way that rational Western thought is structured, that ordered path through understanding the world. Such a view of this magical type was taught to me by my mother. The tarot and the magic therein revealed secrets and hidden knowledge. As I learned the tarot, I started doing readings for others in my community, other friends, other family members, for my mother. And I was able to find answers, or they were able to find answers, however you want to phrase that, about their own selves. And that connection was that social rhythm that was happening. Answers that I couldn't know, secrets about them that I couldn't know, were revealed through this very potent tool. I couldn't have known these answers, and that really cemented this magical frame of reference for me about how I interact with my world. The tarot was the proverbial gateway for me as I progressed in my own life into more of the occult technologies. I was encouraged by my family to start using other tools. So I was given a pendulum, and I used that to divine answers. And it was a way for me to connect with the divine, what I held sacred, and derive some answers, some understanding, why things happened, what I might do in my own life. And to this day, as I learn more of these, they become more baked into my understanding. I use astrological charts constantly. Use it to understand my workmates, employees that I am supervising, times that I should have meetings, and that is the reference point. Why is it working? How is it working? Is sort of a moot point for me in that instance. It is working. It provides a narrative that I understand, that I can reference to, and that allows me to interact in a social way, especially as a not particularly emotional communicator. I tend to be more on the logical side of communication. And having a medium that doesn't rely on rationality helps me interact in a way that is more accessible by those that I'm around, especially at work. But with a lot of other emotional communicators, most people are emotional communicators. And the medium of magic is a way for me to suspend that rationality and focus on that social interaction and that engagement that supports itself. For me, there is magic, and it lies in between, somewhere between states. I don't know what its origin is. I don't know where it is. I know that all of us have been asked in the past, well, what's magic? How do you do it? Can I see it? Where is it? What is it? Is it a force? Can you go get it? Can you make more of it? Can you manipulate it? How does that work? Why is it connecting? I'm not sure that reference is exactly helpful, but it is questions that we do get. And like I said, for me, magic is it lies outside of some of that rationality. It's not quite a force, but something other. I don't need to know how magic works at a mechanistic level, some way that it works, the clockwork behind it. I know that there are approaches that I take, the use of a wand, the use of crystals, reading tarot, all of those things function. And I keep seeing results. Things keep happening. If there's some field, some noetic field that I'm engaging with that is manifesting these, great. But it's not really the point. I'm not there trying to plumb the depths of those mechanistic level kind of thinking. Much like this also comes from the evolution of enlightened thought, right? We started getting the qualities of things from Aristotle. Moving forward, Descartes talks about how people are, he thought that we were made of, he posited that there were some options about thinking of us from a system of pipes, basically, and understanding how we move from that. This very mechanical kind of thinking, which was extrapolated into a lot of other areas of thought, that everything had this kind of rote, clockwork, mechanistic sort of structure that could be understood, taken apart, seen, and understood. Physicalists, people who are very much that physical things are the only things and there isn't anything else other than those physical things, really cottoned on to this idea and it blossomed. And so we get a lot of that kind of mechanistic thought in our day-to-day lives. And it is supported by the previous thought that came before it with the rationality out of Greece moving into that society and then moving into the Enlightenment thought. I always will continue to use these tools. And the way that I reference them is a way for me to interact with my society. What I do see are social connections with each one of these. When someone finds solace or motivation from a magical means, that's what I'm concerned with as far as what is magic to me. There are a lot of times that people reach a very strong, deep emotional level. Say with a tarot, something that comes up for them, that wells up in them, that really motivates a lot of how they feel. And that revelation is something that I think magic is. What it is exactly, I'm not quite sure, what if it's some force or not. But that still has merit, especially in that social dimension. Especially, when working with new witches and seeing them gain some of their own wisdom from tools that they're using, tools that they've been taught or experienced or seen me model or other people in our church model. That's all that it needs to be for me. We can find explanatory means in science, religion, and that can give us some more understanding of who we are, what we are, and where we came from. Magic doesn't necessarily give that explanatory piece. We have found some of that explanation in the daemonology of our church. The wisdom of self-gnosis, how we understand ourselves, is part of that explanatory fact, but it's through this kind of magical related viewpoint that we have of the world. Instead of it being something rote and mechanistic, it's something more amorphous that fluctuates and folds and doesn't necessarily rely on that kind of structure, that forward mechanistic kind of thinking. As witches, a magical religious worldview provides traction for our magical efforts. There's a social dynamic and a difference from the Western rational thought approach. One is not inherently better than the other, which is employ magic in the efforts to control and guide their lives, as well as with others. They look at our world through a lens of magic in a way we can support our communities and individual needs. That's the serving part for magic to me, is that ability to see the worldview, strengthen those social connections, support others and ourselves through that same view. It is not important to know the explanation of magic for it to provide solace or guidance, assurance, and other meaningful impacts about what witchcraft can provide for everyone that engages in this kind of perspective. And you don't have to adopt it all of the time either. There's not, you have to do it all the time or some of the time. It's when it's necessary and when it's relevant to people interacting. I want to tonight, after saying all of that, I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to kind of think about some of those things, and then let's have a discussion about what your experiences of magic are, thoughts on what magic is, either from before you came to attend this sermon, or thoughts on what magic is given the information presented. So I'll turn this back on in about 3 minutes or so, and I'll let you guys kind of think that through. We have some time to think about that. Anybody want to share their thoughts?
Well, I could share mine. You-
Thanks.
Well, right now I'm going to an art path, trying to make it into a career. And I noticed when I was doing my research and finding the best deity for to help me out was Lady Bridget. And ever since I started praying to her, my art has improved back like incredible, and it has improved like vastly. Like it actually, I don't know how to explain it, but stuff that I couldn't do before, like several months ago, I can actually do it with ease without like me have to practice that much or me have to focus that much. It's like it's like I knew what to do or how to make or how to do it. So I believe that through her power, I'm actually improving through Lady Bridget's favor. I don't know if that's exactly magic, but I
I
think it is.
I think it is, right? You're connecting to something supernatural, something divine, at least to you. Also, many others, because that is a very well-known goddess, just so you know. But yes, many people are connecting in this way to a divine source for various reasons, either to honor a specific aspect of their life, but I think that you highlighted it well with the idea of, working on your art and bringing that into being through this conduit. What more does it need to be?
Yeah, and what do you say about Lady Bridget? You said something about what kind of goddess?
Oh, she's a well-known goddess, so a lot of people
Oh,
have
all right.
referenced or, work with her, that kind of thing.
Oh, all right. I thought you said war torn. It's like, what?
Yeah, no, definitely not war-torn.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was, yeah, you're welcome.
Would anybody else like to share either their experiences with magic or their thoughts on what magic is? Mary.
So I have like 4 points for me. The first thing that led me to exploring magic is was healing. I was, going through a really hard time and I just was on the struggle bus. I needed comfort. I needed to feel I had control. I needed to have an understanding of why my life had been the way it was. And I'm so happy that that's where my journey began because I did find healing and so much more. The second thing was really finding myself. We come into this world and we're raised by our caregivers and we're kind of limited in acknowledging who we really are deep down. And through magic, you can work on how you fit into the world and what your path is. And through magic, whether it's tarot, whether it's runes, looking at symbolism, you really can find a place where you know that you're being guided, you know that you're going down the right path. And the third thing for me was empowerment. And I mean, with magic, you have to be so intentional. When you first start, you're like, okay, for me at least, it's a full moon. So what spells coincide with that? And what kind of energy do I need in my life right now? What kind of energy does my family and my close friends need? So it's like really evaluating all of these aspects of your life, focusing on your goals and focusing on how you want to attain them. It's not, magic helps you focus um, on how you can attain those things in a practical way. And then the fourth thing is connection, the connection that you get with the energy of the world, whatever deity you believe in. You're to others, finding community, and connecting with your inner self and finding that inner knowing and using tarot and runes and other forms of divination. It's it's always so amazing because you're asking for guidance, and then once you get the answer, you realize that that's something that you've known this whole time, so it really is just freeing yourself.
Great. Thank you, Mary. I mean, yeah, so much of all of that, right? And kind of, I mean, sort of for the room, but also I don't even have explanations from magic for those things to still have gravitas, to have weight and meaning for me or other people I interact with. It's nice to have, don't get me wrong. I'm gonna read Gwen's. Magic for me encompasses so much of life. But a specific example is I see it in tarot readings, showing me what messages I may not be ready to hear. Oh man, seriously, preach. Letting me know what I have to look forward to or what to expect next. Yeah, the tarot, that will come for your jugular, man, if you are not ready. If you're like, hey, I would like some information, it does not mince words. It is very, very bold. Oof. Thanks, Gwen. Any other shares from folks?
I don't have a whole lot to say about my personal experiences with magic. I know that I've seen it work for me, but not to divulge too much into that. I guess my understanding of magic is the manipulation of the energy that's around us. So everything's vibrating on an atomic and a molecular level, and we can tune into those vibrations or put forth our own vibrations, and that affects the energy of the environment. So one prominent example is speech. The words you speak are vibrations. They can affect, and they do affect, the energy and the emotional state of people that are around you. So in that way, words are spells.
Absolutely agree. This is why I think that whenever I'm casting spells, I think that's why I reference spellcraft as neuro-linguistic programming, speaking something or thinking something with words. But I also think in images. I know not everybody does that, but for example, I study the runes a lot. And so I think in them because they're so innate. I reference them throughout various things that I do, or if I'm trying to understand something, it may be in the representation of a rune. So pictographic representations are also some of that influential. They stand for something and they provide some motivation, I suppose, for the ambient space around us. But I like the vibrations, Courtney. I mean, I definitely think that's kind of some of my thinking, or at least some of my curiosity that has to do with quantum entanglement and that kind of a thing, and how that's influenced by our perception and if we perceive molecules to be acting in a certain way, then they conform in a certain way, and if we're not, they act in a whole different way, right? There's something there, and I don't know quite what it is, but it's definitely a thought experiment that I like to wander around. I don't have anything definitive of it, but there's something about it. Jackie Chan. All right. I've always been told magic is about the intention and the practices you do to manifest and effectuate the change you want to see. Some of these practices are daily, some are specific to a situation. One example in my life is I make elixirs and tinctures for things. And last time I prepared my tincture for a hangover here, it took a lot of preparation, preparation meditation over my herbs as I prepared them and ground them and processed them. The tincture wasn't just for easing the hangover, but also for some self-compassion and self-love, some forgiveness, grace, etc. And I think all my friends who used the tincture during the festival definitely felt some self-compassion. Setting intentions and enchantments, absolutely. And I see that in kitchen witchcraft, for example, putting that intention or that love into things that you're creating and affecting some change, the nourishing of body. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you all for all of those different thoughts and perspectives. I really appreciate it, and it is always influential in its own way. What is magic? For me, magic is a perspective, worldview shaping social dynamics. Though magic doesn't provide explanations, it isn't necessary. For magic to perform the functions that it does, I don't need the explanation. While I'm curious whether it is some kind of force that has consistency and clear causal relationships, the impact and the function of magic are still obvious to me every single day. Every day that I interact, every time that I look for something, when I want, recent meetings that I've had at work have been influential to have and understand it through astrology, right? The way the bodies are moving around the chart and what they're influencing informs a lot of what my behavior is, especially around that. I had an emotional center was not in the business section. I had some really potent forward aggressive stuff within the business one. I was like, oof, this is going to be a tricky conversation. And I will tell you, it was absolutely a tricky conversation. The person I was negotiating with was very aggressive. And I went, I knew that this was going to be somewhere in here. I didn't know exactly where. And it gave me a broad scope of understanding. When I'm asked, what is magic? I recall being that child, sitting with that ornate box in the otherworldly candlelight with my mother. And those are some of the things that come up for me when I'm asked, what is magic? Tarot as the medium was the way that we connected, the way that I connected to others, the way I've had conversations with others and also myself. I recall moments that I reached out to the divine, asking for support or guidance. I recall manifesting my will through spell work. The small moments when a new witch starts applying occult technology for their guidance. For me, this is magic. I don't need anything further to tell me magic is real, and defining it in clear, rational thought really, for me, is not the point. And so much of our church centers around gnosis and demonology. I ask you, what is magic? Maybe magic to you is a force like gravity or some kind of energy. Perhaps magic is maybe a mixture of classic forces like gravity and social mechanics are also incorporated into that flow. Magic is defined by many different people and continues to defy explanation and even rationality. There is a lot of thought and discussion about the word magic, where it comes from, how it was derived, who uses it, why they're using it, how it got linked to things that were negative in connotation. And there's a whole bunch of languaging sort of descriptions of what magic really is. But every society tends to use magic in various ways to mean different things. And it's more of a conceptual thing, an idea or some sort of concept that they're referencing versus it being some pervasive force. Others do think that it is that. So what is magic? I try to find, because it's a question that I was asked, that I posed in front of this, I did try to find the most succinct and articulate answer I could possibly muster for reasons of clarity. And also to answer, what is magic? It is a connective phenomenon, accessible to all, that transmutes will into action. And I think that's as succinct and clear as I could possibly be as to what magic is. It's open for debate, discussion. I could be way off base on this, but from what I see, it tends to be some kind of phenomenon. What that phenomenon is, where it is, how it's located, who has it, how much of it, all of those things are not super important to the conversation. I'm way more in tune with myself. For example, when I'm doing spell work, I know that there's some limits just with what I attempt to do or attempt to cast. A more concrete example is with the tarot, since that's one of my core occult technologies that I use. I, as a child, could only read one or two times. I could do one or two 10-card readings. And after that, I was toast. There was no more. I had to wait, replenish, eat food, that kind of stuff. Today, I can just read them back to back to back to back. There's a lot of practice that went into it, and I think there's kind of this practice that goes into it that helps develop that skill and that resilience, perhaps. But I understand that there's some amount that happens. Maybe it's a conduit that's opening instead of something that I can retain or that makes me more potently magical or something. I'm not really sure, but it's not really necessary to know how I got it or where it came from. I just know that my intuitive check-in with myself means that the more of the tarot that I could read for others, the more of those social interactions I could have. And I'm just checking with myself, like, do I have enough wherewithal, enough, whatever you want to call it, in me to engage in this way in a meaningful way? And so I encourage you to ask those questions of what magic means for you as a witch in your own life and what that means for you and in this community. And especially in this time of division and the assaults on fundamental identities, magic takes a prominent position by connecting us through shared perspectives, something above and beyond some of these gross kind of basic stuff that we have. By gross, just broad, basic kind of things. But like I'm sure most of you know, it's a bit of an interesting time in our political sphere. I won't take a stance one or the other, but those denials and the fears that come out of that on both sides, how else, something other than that is some place that we can connect. As witches, we're able to create some of these answers to guide some of that through this phenomenon of magic. And I don't think there needs to be more past that for me, at least. But maybe you need more for yourself, or maybe you don't. And that's why I want to encourage that curiosity, that same childlike curiosity that I had all those years ago that I still retain to this day. We honor ourselves and each other by living through magic. And I think that's the best thing that I could say about what magic is. Thank you all for listening and participating and sharing your own thoughts. If you have more thoughts or considerations, or you want to talk more, or if you want to have a discussion at length later, you can email the Church of Witchcraft at any point in time, and we're happy to have that conversation. The Chronicles is one such time that you can connect to other members in the church, since we don't really have anything like confession. It's more of a place to kind of talk about things that are prominent in your practice at that moment in time, or to ask questions of clergy and connect to them too for any sort of clarity that you need on your own implementation of magic. You can think about all these different questions that I asked tonight, or any of the other questions I've asked in other sermons, but where you're going to find traction is some of that back and forth, that public discussion between you and at least one other. We can always break out to talk one-on-one in those sessions as well, in case that's something that's more private that you want to talk about, not necessarily within a group, and that's certainly accessible to you. Thank you all for being here. Maybe we'll see you at the next one. Like we saw you at the last one, and now you're here again, so please keep coming. I enjoy seeing you. I love hearing how you think and what your experiences are. So very much appreciated.